Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be on language and how language is used to control and be a form of propaganda and manipulation of the public. And I'm going to break it down into the way language is used and how it is being used against us. If you look at a lot of the leading activists within the left, you'll notice that a lot of them come from a linguistics background. Either they studied it in university or they have some background where they studied courses in it or something within linguistic field. Um, it's not a coincidence. If you look at the way language is being used in our society, it is one easy way to control people. Because one thing that allows freedom is our ability to speak, our ability to convey what's on our mind to others. And if we have difficulty in speaking, then that is a way of controlling us because we can't think, we can't articulate ourselves. And this is what's happening. And I'll give you some examples of how this is happening. And I'm not going to explain really the why of it, but I'm going to show you how it's being used and some things to watch out for. So one of the first things that they do with language is they change it, and they change it frequently. So I remember when I was a kid, I would play Cowboys and Indians, and it was called Indian. People were called Indians, and it wasn't that big of a deal to call somebody an Indian if they were an Indian. And what we meant by that was not somebody from India. We meant somebody that was a native Canadian or whatever the term is today. And the language kept on changing. So it first was Indians, and even like some of the laws were based on the Indian Act. And there's different laws within Canada that still use the language because the laws were created 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and they still use the word Indians. And even the Indians within Canada use the word Indians. It's not that it's the term that they used, even though it came from a strange background where the story goes that Columbus came over and he thought he found India and he started calling everybody Indian. That's not actually what happened, but that's kind of the myth behind it. But that language sort of became part of the culture, that they refer to themselves as Indians as well. So if you look at the modern age, the use of language changed very quickly. So what happened was instead of being called Indians, it was called natives, it was called First Nations, it was called Indigenous people. It kept on changing. And the reason it changes is if you try to use the wrong word, you can be shamed for it. You can be put down. You can be like, oh, you're a racist because you called them an Indian? Oh my goodness, how insensitive of you. And it's that use of language where they keep on changing it that makes it very hard to be able to say the right thing. So if you can make your opponent say the wrong thing, well, you can shame them and you can control them. Shaming them is the easiest way to kind of knock your opponent out. It's much easier to fight somebody that is not fighting back, where you've shamed them so much that they just don't give any fight back. So that's one tactic that they do, is just change the language. I think about it as the word, I hate to say this word, but because I've been shamed into saying it in the past, the word nigger. It used to be a legitimate term to use. It used to be like actually a term of endearment. And within the Black community, it still can be used as a term of endearment. But the term originally just meant black. If you look at the origins of the word nigger, it actually comes from the Spanish, meaning black, dark-skinned. And it just sort of grew where it got, people took that word and they twisted it. They said, oh, no, that's a negative word. If you use it, you're racist and blah, blah, blah. And so it became colored. then it became black, then it became people of color, and that became more inclusive. They really liked that, where they include more people into it. Um, and it became that whole idea of controlling the language. So if you said black, or if you said um, like something other than what they accept as the politically correct term, then you're shamed. So it becomes really hard because if you're used to saying a certain word, if if up to 5 minutes ago it was a fine thing to say that you called somebody like a person of color or black or colored or whatever it was, then all of a sudden they shift it, and you when you say those things, oh, the shame comes on you, and that's a way of controlling you. They change the words so you never know what the right word is to use. And it makes you less willing to speak on those topics if you feel that you're going to be shamed when you say the wrong thing. So it's all about control of people, like using the words to change the words to basically shame people. So that's the first way. So you change the words constantly, and so that nobody knows what the word is that they're supposed to be using. The other thing that they do is they take words and make new ones, and this is common within languages to make new words. But what they'll do is they'll create words that are deliberately designed to create a bad meaning. What I mean by that is, like, think about the words mansplaining or white nationalism or rape culture or objectification, Islamophobia. All these kind of words have real negative meanings, right? And but if we think about them, let's think about them. Mansplaining. Well, mansplaining could be any time a guy talks. Right now, I'm mansplaining because I'm a guy. I'm explaining things. That's mansplaining. So if you want to shut down your opponent, you can use this word to basically say, "Well, you're mansplaining." It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. Like, a guy can explain himself. Generally, when you're discussing things with people, and if it's a guy that you're explaining, that has to explain things to rebut you, well, he is explaining. So mansplaining doesn't make any sense. But the use of the word can have that negative connotation where it's like he's a sexist, bigoted, whatever you want to kind of apply to it, has all those meanings within it, embedded within it. So it controls him. So you can basically say, oh, you're mansplaining, and then that shuts him down. Another thing is Islamophobia. Think about it. What does Islamophobia mean? Islam is a religion. It's not a group of people. It's actually just a religion. The people that follow Islam are Muslims, but Islam is a religion, and nobody's really afraid of a religion. They can they can criticize it and not like it, but the concept of calling it Islamophobia means that when you call somebody phobic, you're saying, oh, they're rooted in fear, they're rooted in hatred, and it basically implies something that is not really true. And it implies that they hate Muslims or they hate a certain people, when in fact, um, Islam is just a religion, and you can criticize any religion. My belief, I believe that anyone can criticize any religion. And if a religion is strong, it should be able to withstand those criticisms. So it's okay that you criticize Islam as long as you give valid criticisms. And if the religion is strong enough, it should be able to withstand those criticisms. So the point is, they're using these words to basically create ways of controlling people. If you can call somebody Islamophobic, well, then you can stop criticism about that religion. If you can call somebody a mansplainer, then you can stop the criticism of men. Another thing that they do is they create terms like white nationalism. Well, if you think about it, I'm white. I'm a nationalist. I believe in my nation. That makes me a white nationalist. So if I'm proud of my culture and I'm proud of my nation, then all of a sudden they can deem me as being a white nationalist, where we're promoting people like myself, promoting my group identity becomes a negative thing. And they really love to use the word white nationalist or white supremacist. These things that are really kind of meaningless if you think about it, because it doesn't it really doesn't mean anything. You don't call people like Japanese nationalists or Nigerian nationalists, and it's only within white people that they make it sound like a bad thing. So it's really meaningless, but it's a way of controlling people, and it's so powerful of a control that if you say somebody is a white nationalist, for example, then they are immediately associated with a whole bunch of other things. They're associated as being racist, xenophobic, a whole bunch of other things, rather than what really they should be associated with is just their skin color, that they're white, and that they are a nationalist, and that they're just proud of their nation, and they want to protect their nation, and they want to see that their nation doesn't succumb to change, like to change of culture, to change of the ethnic background of the nation, and you should be able to respect that. So um, I'm not saying I'm a white nationalist in the general way, but it's such a toxic term nowadays because it's been used in such a weird way. And this is the power of language, that we can use things in such a way that that really makes it so negative that you can't openly speak about it. And that's what I'm trying to do on this channel, is openly speak about ideas. Even bad ideas should get the sunlight that they deserve so that they can be disinfected. So that's two of the ways that language is being used. So they first, as I said, they create new words, keep on switching it up. So you got to keep on changing the language. Then they actually create new words altogether, where it's like used in such a way that it has a negative connotation and really meaningless word, but it has such a powerful use for opponents. Another thing that they do is they use language in an opposite way, where you'd think it means one thing, but it really means something completely opposite. And a good example of this is Antifa. Now, if you think about Antifa, the term is supposed to be anti-fascist. And you'd think that that would be a good thing, because fascism, which is a form of socialism, by the way, was a very evil thing. It's Hitler, it's Mussolini, it's a lot of dictators that pushed for socialism on a national level and killed lots of people as a result. It was a horrible, horrible thing. And so when you hear anti-fascists, well, you think, wow, they must be the good guys because they're fighting against fascism, and fascism is evil. But those same anti-fascists are the people who are fascists. They're socialists, openly socialists. If you see any of their rallies, they hold the communist flags. They're openly socialist in their viewpoints, and they act in a very fascistic manner, where they shut down conversations. They don't allow free speech. They do everything that the fascists did within Germany. So it's that opposite kind of meaning, the way that they use in the language. They try to pretend it means something good, but actually it means something completely opposite. It has like an opposite meaning. Well, the way it's actually, the reality of it is the opposite meaning. So they use language that we think is positive. Like another one that I always liked was net neutrality. I'm an internet guy, so I really like when you hear the word net neutrality, you think, wow, net neutrality, it means leaving the internet free and all this kind of stuff. You think that that's what it means. But the actual meaning of the language is that it's about taking away freedom from the internet, making it more regulated. So it's actually the opposite. So language is being used that way, where they manipulate it. So you think of something as being a positive thing, but really the actual reality of it is that they use it in a bad way. They do something bad with it. And that's what happens a lot with this language, where we're being manipulated. We're being the the language is constantly shifting on us. We're being told one thing and it actually means another thing. So we're getting manipulated by our own language, and it becomes harder and harder to speak. And the things that we think we're saying or doing or believing actually mean the opposite. So it's that confusion. So the first few things I talked about really were about shaming, but now I'm really trying to get it. The way that they use language to control people is to confuse them. So you're not really sure what the language means. And it really becomes a challenge to use the language because you're not sure if you're speaking correctly. And another thing that they do to sort of emphasize that, to really manipulate things, is they try to use language in a way that sounds good. Like, think about things like equality, diversity, inclusion. These all sound like very positive things. And they use those words, and they like, I was actually surprised. I went to my community center, my local community center, which is should be you're about your community, like, right? It should be about, the people within your community. And my community up till about 4 years, 5 years ago, was predominantly white. It was like 95, 98% white. It was pretty much all white only 5 years ago. Now it's maybe 40, 50% white. It's pretty low how quickly it's changed in terms of demographics. And what I noticed when I went to my community center is they had all this propaganda. All the walls, every single, I'm not joking about this, every single wall had something about equality, inclusion, diversity as a strength, like all these kind of slogans about, how we should be opening our borders, opening our doors to more and more migration. And it wasn't about community anymore. It was just about, if you're not for all this change, then you are a bigot, racist, whatever. It was like, you have to accept, you have to allow for this change, or else you're a bigot and racist. Okay. So, so it was weird how these words, that they sound positive. Equality sounds like a good thing. Like, I used to love the idea of equality, that everybody's equal and we're all the same, and we're all working together for a common goal, and it sounds really wonderful. But if you think about it, what does it really mean? It means we are all the same. We're not special. We're not able to have differences that will make us achieve more. Or, it's not about individualism. And that's a very socialist way of thinking, that everybody is the same. Equality is about making everybody sort of leveled and boring. Like, it's a horrible idea if you think about it. But we're indoctrinated to believe these are good ideas. And we're believed, if we speak against these words, to say, oh, equality sucks, is heresy. And if you go against the language, if you go against the ideas that they try to promote, then they'll use language against you again, where they're trying to, like, create these ideals, that there's these things that sound good, that you believe are good, and any criticism of them is heresy. It's like a religion. It's a cult. A cult of equality, I called it in one of my other videos. And it's a really dangerous thing. The diversity is a strength, equality, inclusion, all these things really are words that you use to control us, create positive meanings, but really are just used to manipulate us and make us feel shame if we try to go against them. Another thing that they'll do, and it's in some ways more insidious than the other things that I described, is the way that they'll take over a word. They'll co-opt it, or they'll take over a word that had a very innocent meaning, and they'll make it into something very negative. So I remember the term alt-right when it first came out, before even Richard Spencer took over it. It originally meant sort of like the Tea Party people, who were not the right wing in terms of what had happened to the right wing it became like sort of very religious orientated, and wasn't really conservative anymore. It was more religious right, and more about fundamental religious, social conservative viewpoints. And the alt-right was kind of a way of going back to true conservatism, where it was about, free markets, uh, small government, stuff like that, where it was a very different philosophy. And so alt-right really meant just an alternative to the way right-wing had sort of gone into this religious right. And what happened was it was a growing movement. It was actually growing very powerful in terms of its social influence. And what happened was the left were like, oh, we have to demonize this. And so they made alt-right a term that became associated with another term that they love is white nationalism. And this sort of, uh, racist kind of ideology. And, some of the people within the alt-right sort of were, you know, believed in that white identity and white nationalist idea. And they sort of were able to demonize both groups very, very effectively. And you'll notice now whenever they talk about a leader that they don't like, they'll just call them alt-right. And they'll use it so that it used to be, as I said, a positive term that really didn't mean anything particularly negative. But they'll use it until it becomes something negative. Another, and sometimes it's the right that actually does it, which is kind of cool to see where we fight back with language. One that I can think of is fake news. Originally, it was the CNNs and all those kind of media that were calling Trump fake news. Like he was, alternative truths and stuff like this, where they were trying to like make him seem like a dishonest person for what he was saying. And he flipped it back on them and called them fake news. And he was very effective at coining that towards them, which I thought was quite brilliant. So sometimes it works the other way around, but most often you'll see this tactic on the left, where they really do try to control language and manipulate it in such a way that even something that was once a positive thing becomes a negative. Another one that I can think of is just the word right wing. Right wing really just means somebody that's conservative, has more of a small government kind of mentality, more individualistic, less socialistic viewpoint. Another term that they sort of manipulated to make it a bad term is nationalist. I mean, if you think about it, nationalist is a good thing. All it means is that you're proud of your nation, you want to protect your community, that you want to, protect your borders, protect the people within your nation, that you want to have a nation that is strong, those basic concepts. But what they did is they tried to associate it with Nazism, because Nazism were, the definition of a Nazi was National Socialists. Now they focus on the nationalist part of that, and so the socialist part of it, but really it was the socialist part that was actually the important part. The nationalist part was just the framework in which they were working in. So they make that association that anyone that's a nationalist now is somebody who's basically a Nazi, a fascist. So it's kind of extreme, because if you think about it, it was nationalists that fought against Hitler. It was the nations that came up and said, hey, look, what you're doing is wrong. Socialism is evil, and it's killing millions of people. And it was nationalist people that believed that they didn't want some globalist like Hitler to basically take over the world, and they fought against it. They said, we want our nations to be intact. We want it, and they wanted to regain the freedom of other nations that had been conquered by Hitler. They wanted to give France back its nationality instead of being part of this globalistic German empire. So it's funny that they make that association between nationalism, which is a force of good, with actually Nazism and fascism, which was a force of evil. So it's totally bogus. So this is how they take over the key words in our society, that, and they make them toxic, so that we lose the ability to even say things that we know to be true. Because now saying that you're a nationalist has these weird bad associations with it. So you might not use that word. You feel like, well, I can't say that anymore because people will think that I'm a white supremacist, blah blah blah. They'll think all these crazy things about you, but it's really just the manipulation of language. So uh, one other thing that they do, and it's another level to this, is actual word shaming. One of the most powerful words within the English language is racism. One of the things that they'll easily do to silence anybody and control people is to just call them a racist. If you think about it, if you look at the definition of racism, it's pretty meaningless. All it means is that you think your group is superior to another group. Okay, so what? That really doesn't mean anything. Like, most people have like natural in-group preferences. It's just it's mother nature that we prefer our own group, and there's no crime in that. Okay, it's natural. If you're Chinese, you want to hang out with other Chinese people. If you're black, you want to hang out with other black people, and it's natural. This is from birth. We actually have this. And that would be considered racist because you have a preference for your group over other groups. If you look at the actual definition of racism, there is actually no mention of hate in it. It's only that we created that association. So racism is pretty meaningless, but it's this word of power. It's a word of shaming. And it's one of these things that they do, that they really want to control us by word shaming us, by using language that says, you are a racist or you are a sexist. Again, being a sexist really doesn't mean anything. Of course, I'm going to prefer being a guy because I'm a guy. There's always a bit of the battle of the sexes. And guys will want to be guys, girls will want to be girls, and they think differently, and they'll want to promote their gender over the other gender. I only believe in two genders, by the way. And that's human nature. But they'll use the word to shame you. So if you feel no pride in your own self, if you have no confidence in who you are and what you are, then that's easy way to control you, because you have nothing, you have no spine to stand up with, because you've been chopped down, you've been indoctrinated to believe that you are a bad person just for the way you are. That's one of the most powerful things that you can do. Shame somebody so much that they have no courage to be the person that they are. And that's a very powerful way of controlling somebody. So you call them a sexist, you call them a racist. So they have no pride in the person that they are. They have no confidence in who they are. They cannot stand up for themselves. So these are some of the ways that language is being used to manipulate people. And there's more to it than this, actually. But I want you to at least see these ones and realize how things that are being done to control us. One other thing I'd like to mention within the language thing is the way that language is being changed altogether in a way that it conveys a different meaning. This is a really common thing that they do as well. And I just want to point this out as a last final point, that if you look at like illegal immigration or illegal aliens, that's the official term. That's the legal term for people that come into your country illegally. They're called aliens because they're foreign born. They're not from that nation. Okay, so illegal aliens. Now, the way that language has been manipulated, they call it undocumented migrants. Now, migrant is just somebody that moves from one place to the next. Pretty meaningless, pretty simple, and it sounds like a legitimate thing. It's okay that people are able to move around. We don't want to prevent people from being able to move around. And undocumented means that they just don't have a passport. It's just some casual person coming into your country. So what? They're not harming anybody, and they want to make them sound like more legitimate. So that's another means of manipulating language by changing the term that sounds very negative, illegal alien, somebody that's foreign, somebody that, it's like, it's almost like a parasite, right? It's like some foreign body coming into your country. They want to make the language sound different, and they try to manipulate it to sound like it means like something much nicer. Oh, they're not illegal. They're good people. They're undocumented. They just don't have the paperwork. That's all. They're not bad people. They just lack the paperwork. And that's the manipulation of language. And they if you and it's amazing to me how quickly that language spreads through the media. Like terms like undocumented immigrant is relatively new. It's it's within the last maybe 10 years, maybe even more recent than that. And it was like one day all of a sudden that language was in every media news outlet, as if that's the language you got to use. And it's amazing how quickly that changed to be that way. So it makes you wonder, who is sending out this language? Who is controlling this? And it's almost like a puppet master is involved. And if you ever see the way language is being used within our society, it's very rapid that these changes can happen. And there is sort of a flow of how these changes happen. Another one that I always thought was interesting, and this is sort of a different within the same topic but different genre, is global warming. It used to be called global warming, and what was happening was, if you looked at the temperature charts, it was like, going up, and it looked like, oh, it's going to keep on going up, hockey stick, but after a while, the temperature started coming back down. And then we realized that climate is very cyclical, that, it goes up and it goes down and goes up and it goes down. And that makes the word global warming it's not so powerful anymore, because if it's not consistent, then people will start doubting it. Okay, so a much more powerful way of controlling the message was to change the word altogether. Instead of calling it global warming, because people were realizing that the world wasn't always warming, they called it climate change. And all of a sudden, by calling it climate change, well, it's meaningless if you think about it. Well, climate's always changing. Even within a year, we have, 4 seasons, right? It's always changing. It's warm one day, it's cold the next. And within a day, like I had one day in Canada where the temperature changed like 10, 15 degrees within one day. And it can change dramatically, right? So, after a while, it's meaningless. Like, what does climate change mean? Change from what? So that's one of the concepts and they try to make it mean something, where they're saying, oh, it's that this is not the normal. We're changing to something abnormal. And that's one of the ways that they control language, that they take something and they try to imply a meaning. But if you actually think about the language, if you actually think about what those words truly mean, it's truly meaningless, because climate changes all the time. It doesn't really mean anything, but they use it in such a way that they can control us, that they can say, hey, climate change, it's changing, and it's not what it should be. And they use that to try to prevent us from thinking, hey, maybe there's something else going on here. And one last point, because I know this video is running a little bit long. There's just so much that I have to say about this issue, about language, is when all of these other things fail, when you can't change the language enough, where you can't switch the meanings of things enough, when you can't force people to be shamed by certain words like racism and all this other stuff, when you can't do all of these things, there's one last thing that they do. They silence you altogether. Just say what and this is where hate speech comes in, where they deem whatever you say as hate. And they create laws that will silence you. And if you say anything that goes against what they believe, that they want you to believe, they will silence you. They will force you to believe what they believe, because you will be considered speaking hate speech. So hate speech is the final trick that they use to control language, and it's where they prevent any dissent. They prevent anything that allows people to actually voice their own opinion, and they call it hate speech in order to prevent free speech and freedom, and prevent individuals from thinking on their own. So that's why when groups, I told you about Antifa, the first thing that they do is they try to silence their opposition, not even allow them to speak, because if people speak, they can form their own ideas, and they will realize the truth that we're all being just controlled, and we're being pushed into a socialist dystopia. So I kind of want you to be aware of all these tactics so that you can protect yourself and regain the freedom in your own life. Do not be afraid of language. Use it the way you want to use it. Say Indian, say whatever word it is that you want to say. Have the freedom to speak, because only through free speech can we actually be free. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your feedback on how language is being used, and watch my other videos and subscribe. Bye for now.